Welcome to the Sacred Emergence Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Wong, and I'm so thrilled that you're here. This is a place where you'll be guided to living your most aligned life so that your truest, most radiant self can emerge. We'll be jamming on topics ranging from spirituality, entrepreneurship, to wellness and lifestyle design, and everything in between that can support you to grow, evolve, and shine, all the while not taking ourselves too seriously. So if you're ready to step into your leadership, break through limiting beliefs, own all of who you are, and expand in abundance, grab yourself your faith cup of tea and let's dive in. Hello, beautiful listener. Welcome to today's episode where I speak with returning guest Alyssa Johnson, Esquire. Alyssa and I talk a lot about racial literacy, and Alyssa's work is with lawyers and legal organizations around helping lawyers with well-being and emotional intelligence. And her passion is around dismantling white supremacy. And this episode, we dive into that a lot more. And so as you're listening, please take care of yourself. Topics are potentially activating and can stir up emotions. So take care of yourself, take deep breaths. This episode is over an hour-ish, so wanted to give you a heads up. And at the same time, I really value Alyssa's work and was excited to have her back. So without further ado, enjoy and take it easy. Take care. Hello, beautiful listeners. Welcome back to our episode of the Sacred Emergence Podcast. I am so honored to have a returning guest, which I'm just so excited because these conversations are so important. Alyssa Johnson, Esquire, welcome back.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for having me back. I just adore you and I adore your podcast. And I'm so honored to be back here for a second time. How freaking lucky am I?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I will share a link in the show notes to our first interview, like our first conversation, but we were talking about, anti-racism and doing the work, and like you're continuing to create workshops in your workplace. And like, I just love, because you're white, I love that you're just calling stuff out. And like, I see you on the socials, I talk to you and you're actually gaining momentum. Like people are reaching out to you because they see the importance of your work. And I talk about this in my circles, how because I'm Asian, right? I'm Chinese. And I feel like when I talk about race, it freaking activates people. It's so uncomfortable.
Yep.
But hearing it from you, it's uncomfortable, but it's more acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we were also talking about periods, women periods. And and how that actually is part of the work as well, like knowing our bodies. And then before we hit play, I mentioned the word patriarchy, and you're like, I don't like using the word patriarchy, so we're gonna dive all in.
I mean, yes to all of that. I'm so passionate about all of these topics, as you know, because you and I are friends and have had multiple conversations on it, including the first podcast that you so kindly invited me on. So I can kick us off. You can kick us off. What feels good to you?
Well, I use the word patriarchy, and I like to preface it with wounded patriarchy. However, it puts people in boxes and labels, and it puts it in the other, right? Like we point fingers and we start labeling things. Yeah. But I loved what you said and why you don't use patriarchy. So can you share more?
I can. So I'm going to clarify. I don't actually have a problem with the word patriarchy. That's not where my issue is. I generally do not talk about patriarchy because patriarchy bashing is the white woman's most favorite way to opt out of or exit a conversation about white supremacy. And I have been doing my race literacy work since 2015 and have really come out more and more and like building a business. And because I'm a lawyer, working within the legal profession a lot, and then also outside of the law. I have had dozens and dozens of teachings and conversations with white women, and especially white women who are sort of interested in racial literacy work or are actually fully invested in it. They tend to be liberal, or progressive, and so the progressive liberal white woman's favorite way to get out of talking about supremacy is patriarchy or toxic patriarchy. And because I am acutely aware of that, I used to do it myself before I dived into my race-based trauma, which is what we all actually have. White people have it too, but supremacy suppresses that messaging. I always would, want to take a conversation to toxic patriarchy and how it was affecting me and women, and I made massive assumptions, as white women do, that white women and women of color have the same interests and needs, and that's not true at all. So I used to do that behavior rampantly, where I would get out, exit out of a racial literacy conversation and bring up patriarchy. And because I'm so acutely aware of it now, and because I see it so frequently amongst white women, I tend to not really talk about patriarchy and focus on racial literacy. But I will caveat that with, I'm just going to say it because this is the actual truth. White women who aren't doing racial literacy work, and I should say we, I don't want to say you, I want to include myself, and we bash the patriarchy. There's a few pieces to this. The first is that, we live in a toxic patriarchy, but we live in a toxic white patriarchy. Men of color do not have the same rights and privileges as white men, even under a patriarchal system. And so we live in a toxic white patriarchy. And what white women do is we uphold it. And the way that we do that is whenever, if we're not doing racial literacy work, which many white women are not, if a person of color says something to us that triggers our race-based trauma, which takes almost nothing to get that trauma triggered, what we will do as white women is we will run to white men to be supported. I'm not racist. How could they say this? That, the Black woman was mean to me. We do all these things. And then we ask white men to support us and nurture us and hold us, which in effect is lifting up toxic white patriarchy. So we are feeding right into a system that many of us claim to dislike and want to dismantle. I just shared so much, but I'm very passionate about it. And I've done a ton of research and inner work around this. So I feel, I feel well-versed in it, at least, as far as I can be 7, 8 years into a racial literacy journey.
That is so good. God, I had a question come through as you were talking, and it had to do with the word patriarchy. What was my question?
Let's ask Rick James. Can he help us with? And we laugh because, well, you feel free. I don't, feel free to share that if you want, Michelle.
Oh my God. Before we hit play, what's the name of that song?
Super Freak.
Oh, Super Freak. We dance to it because we're super freaks.
That's super right. Freaks.
It was perfect.
Best.
Okay, so this is what I wanted to say. I mean, I think you and I are talking about this before, not this is just you and I are having a casual conversation about this around if we dismantle, let's just say the patriarchy. And you're asking me such a beautiful question, and I loved your answer. It was around the matriarchy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So can you share your perspective around that? Because so your question was, if let's just say we healed the toxic patriarchy, right? What happens with the woman? Yeah. Right.
So my question, because I spend time in introspection around this, is if it is possible, I don't think it is, but if it's possible to dismantle toxic, and remember, I'm going to always say white patriarchy, because again, race, skin color is tied to everything in our country. It's very hard to separate it out, even when looking at it from a patriarchal or matriarchal perspective. So toxic white patriarchy. If we are somehow able to dismantle that without doing race literacy work, and I will talk more about what that is, because that may be a new term for some of your listeners. I'll do that in a moment. If we can actually do that without doing the race piece, my question for you was, what do you think would happen? Like, what did you think society would turn into? Do you remember your answer? And if you do you want to share it?
I don't remember my answer because I was having trouble understanding your question.
Yeah, because it's a very, abstract question.
Yeah. So basically how I understood it just now, like, is okay, this is the part that I find challenging because we're also impacted by the white patriarch, right?
Mhm.
So how I saw it was if the men were healed, and I don't mean to associate men with patriarchy, like that's like, but it's like, but if we're not doing the work, like if we're not talking about if we're not doing racism work, and then the patriarchy was healed, well, I don't even think that's really possible. Like, I mean, I know your answer and I agree with your answer. I don't remember what I said. Do you remember what I said?
You said it so beautifully, and I'm going, I'm paraphrasing, so I'm going to botch it. The effect that the masculine that wounding would be healed, and it was like, and it was you were so beautiful, and like I think you weren't really sure what would happen then, or but I could be remembering that piece wrong, but I remember you said it so eloquently about the wounding being healed and the men having done the inner work to really dismantle toxic white patriarchy. And I was so struck by that. I thought it was just so loving and kind and amazing, and not something I had considered. And so I appreciate you and thank you for illuminating and enlightening me about the potentiality of that.
Yeah, there's something there that I feel like is my next level of work around, holding space for men to heal their trauma in a way, because that's something that's not really talked about. I mean, that's toxic masculinity, which I don't really love that word or term, but I love what you said for your answer to your question. There's so many layers here. It's all so intertwined. Right?
Yeah. Did you want me to share my answer?
I would love for you to share your answer.
Yeah. So I think, of course, this is just conjecture, who knows? If we are able to dismantle toxic white patriarchy without addressing supremacy, and supremacy, white supremacy, I want to share that in a bit. I'm not gonna go down, actually. I'm not gonna go down right now, but there's a piece that's super important here that I need white women to hear. But if that happens, what I think our country turns into is a toxic white matriarchy, because we as white women have not done our inner work around our internalized racism. Therefore, we are not bringing women of color along with us. Right, we're exerting and asserting, which we have done since enslavement, 600 really years, if you look at colonization as well. We have asserted our needs over and at the expense of women of color. And I think that's exactly what would happen here, is we would then just push a white woman's agenda. So we've made it a toxic white matriarchy. And because we haven't address the internalized racism that we all carry, what we would end up doing is white men, I think, would be second. Right now, under supremacy, white women are second. I actually think we actually have much more power than men of color, because supremacy is a worse problem in our country than patriarchy. And so I think it would just go from white men being at the top of the food chain and white women second, to white women being at the top of the food chain and white men being second. And I don't actually think there would really be any advancements or any efforts towards equity or equality for people of color. That's what I think it would turn into. So I say all of that because, to me, we have to do the racial literacy work. If we being white women, really want to dismantle toxic white patriarchy, we got to do the inner work so that we truly stand with people of color.
Okay. And as you were, sharing, you kind of put some thumbtacks in some
I did put some
terminology.
Yeah.
Let's go and define it. So race literacy, and then what's the other one?
Mm-hmm. The other one was the benefit. Yeah, the benefits afforded us, meaning white people, white women under supremacy, are far greater than what we lose under patriarchy.
Yeah.
So the racial literacy. So you can generally use racial literacy and anti-racism interchangeably. But I find that racial literacy lands it lands better for me, and it lands better for the audience I tend to work with. And I say that because when you say anti-racism, the term anti, of course, is pushing against. Well, certainly as a formerly practicing attorney and working within the legal profession, for many lawyers, a big part of their job is pushing against something. And we know that that's very, very exhausting, and it burns us out. So racial literacy, which is a term I learned from Milagros Phillips, who is a phenomenal racial literacy teacher and author, is the idea that I'm educating myself. I'm expanding my awareness and knowledge, because as a white person, the reality is we have all gotten the white supremacist playbook and script. We all have it. Like, even and we weren't handed something, most likely, but we've all gotten the same teachings. We all have the same sort of similar messaging. We don't know what racially literate messaging is until we start doing the work. The only messaging we have is supremacist messaging. Not our fault, but it is our responsibility to educate ourselves and start to learn and immerse ourselves in what racial literate messaging is. So with that, to me, it gives me more grace, more empathy, more compassion, especially towards myself and other white people, because when we do our racial literacy journey, it's really a journey of healing race-based trauma. And depending upon where one is in the journey, if a white person is in the very beginning stages of it, there's going to be extensive anger, guilt, shame, defensiveness, crying, lashing out. I mean, it's trauma. And so the more grace that we can give ourselves, and just being gentle with ourselves and letting our internal world unravel, because we're having to heal lies that we've been taught. We have to heal lies we've told ourselves. We have to heal the ways we have deeply hurt people of color. And every single white person has done it multiple times. So there's a lot of work there that has to be done. So to me, that I just think racial literacy tends to land better because of the energy behind it. But you can use both terms, generally speaking, interchangeably. And then, I'm sorry, I will let you speak. I'm a lawyer, as you know, and my God, I mean, we don't stay quiet.
No, I love that. I actually really love that, race literacy, because then it makes it like, well, yeah, it doesn't have a sting, just because it's true, like because the word anti has, you can use it in front of so many, and it becomes politicized in a way, like the word I'm anti this, I'm anti that, and the word anything, right? So it's almost like, it can create a knee-jerk reaction. So I love saying race literacy. And I like that, it's more approachable, because I think it makes it more accessible, which I think is needed.
Yeah.
So I like that. And then part 2, white supremacy.
Yeah.
Which I think is like, we talked about it in our first conversation together that I'll share in the show notes. But when the whole Black Lives Matter, in 2020, when like it was all bubbling up to surface, like even for me, like hearing the word white supremacy, I was like, ooh, because I've always associated that with like the KKK.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Right. But it's like, then you read deeper about it. And it's like, like, I understand if you're looking at like, just not associating anything word wise, just looking at, okay, having like more power. If you're white, you have more power. I think that's basically what it is. But yeah, if you can share your thoughts and define it, how you were referencing it.
Well, white supremacy is the ideology, or really the practical piece in our country. It's certainly not just intellectual. It's not an intellectual experience. This is the reality that my white skin gives me privileges that I'm not even aware of. because it's just like my everyday experience. So let me give you an example. I can walk into a store. I mean, for the most part, I'm not going to be followed. No one's going to look anything at, like think twice about me. I'm just like, I look like a Karen, right? Like, like, right. Like this, like, I'm an affluent white woman and, so like, I just like, no one even bats an eyebrow or, raises an eyebrow, bats an eye. So, people of color, certainly probably not everyone, but generally speaking, that's not the true for people of color. Walking into store and being followed, assuming that, a person of color is there for malintent to steal or cause harm in some way. This was something I learned years ago. I think I was actually in law school and this was like the summer after my first year of law school. So this was the summer of 2002. And I was doing an internship with like a clinical law program. And I went to Maryland, University of Maryland for law school. And the law school is located in Baltimore, where most of Maryland's grad programs are. And I was really fortunate to be able to attend at the time a meeting with Mayor Martin O'Malley, who was the mayor at the time, and like his chiefs of staff, like this super high level Baltimore City meeting I got to go to because of the clinic that I was interning in. It was really cool. And I remember he was like the city solicitor, which is like a city's attorney, main attorney. I think he had a BMW and he was driving and he was pulled over and true story, in the front seat of his car, he had a Maryland law book. It's called Uniform Commercial Code, but like, it's a legal book. He actually had this book in the front seat of his car. Got pulled over. Of course, he's a Black man. He's driving a BMW, which undoubtedly he worked his butt off for, to raise, to rise to that level of, success in one's legal career is, he put in the work, and got, had to get out of the car, was like, just horrifying. And he was like, I'm an attorney, of course the police were grilling him. How did you get this car? Assuming he'd stolen it or, probably bought it with, legal means. And he's like, I'm an attorney. Like, I'm the city solicitor. Like, I'm the main attorney for the city. There's a law book in the front passenger seat of my car. And they wouldn't believe him. And so is that going to happen to a white person? Not in a bajillion, gazillion years, unless the police have probable cause, they see, a gun in the car. And and then of course it's, I live in Texas, so that might not do anything, but like, they see, like an ounce of Coke or something, like, there's going to be something that has to happen. They aren't just going to do that. But that, as I have learned it, and, that is absolutely par for course for people of color. So it's these things that we just, in a white centric world, which is what we live in, we aren't even like, this stuff isn't even in our awareness because we don't experience it. And so that is where the privilege comes in. And it's also, I think, even someone, a Black male friend of mine said this, and it was just so poignant how he said it, is to him, like, he fully understood privilege in the way that we as white people have a choice whether or not to do racial literacy work. We can opt into racial literacy work and start to unpack the society of lies that we live in. If you're not doing racial literacy work, you're just living in lies, is the reality. When you start doing it, you're going to start to see our entire culture is a lie. But we have a choice, and white people can stay asleep, meaning not do racial literacy work, or they can choose to start doing it. We can dip our toes in, we can do it for a little bit, step out of it, never do it again, right? Like, we have choice. People of color don't have choice. There is no choice. It is an everyday experience trying to survive, let alone thrive in whiteness. And so he just was so poignant the way he said it. So that's a very long explanation and definition, but I think especially for white people, we need to, like, so much of race literacy or anti-racism or racism work, supremacy purposefully keeps abstract in an intellectual exercise, and it's not abstract. It's not an intellectual exercise. It is a lived body experience, body and psyche experience for people of color. So I try to make it very concrete.
Do you offer race literacy work for the general people, not lawyers?
Lawyers. Yeah. So I have a race literacy book club, and it is for white women and white trans women. And it's for everyone. And you can just find it on my website and sign up. It's free. And then I have joined a company called the Opt-in, and this is the country's only racial literacy and cultural competency firm that works with white senior leaders in visionary companies who want to use race literacy and cultural competency to stay relevant in the marketplace. Because if you look at the demographics, within like 20 years, white people will be the minority, which is actually driving a lot of supremacist activity right now, because white people are terrified of being the minority. Because our greatest fear as white people is that the tables are going to turn and we are going to become enslaved. That's actually what it is. That is truly our deepest fear. Most white people will probably not go there, will not go that deep with it and start to work with that fear, but that's what it is. And so that's driving this fear of white people being the minority and people of color being the majority is what's driving a lot of behavior right now, supremacist behavior or, activities. So I say all that. The opt-in, yes, and thank you. I apologize. I
love it. I'll share all of that. In the show notes. I don't know if people go to the show notes but like I put stuff in the show notes.
I love it. I think they do. I do. When I listen to podcasts, I'll look at show notes.
Yeah. Okay, good. I had a few thoughts come in. One is just, this is just funny. Like, so when you were saying white people just can they just get away with stuff basically, what I mean? So there's this really funny, I was watching this, was on Netflix. It's he's an Asian comedian. I think Wong kind of was helped produce I forget his name. But he had this really funny joke. He's like, oh yeah, I work with this team of people. This guy, he's talking about he's like Black and this is his skill set that he brings to the team. There's this other guy and he's, Mexican and this is what he brings to the team. So he's like raving about all these other people. And there's this guy named, I don't know, Joe. And he's white, and we don't know what skills he has. He just has these magical powers. I'm laughing so hard. He's like, he just has magical powers that we're all in awe of.
Right. He just is white, and he's a white man, and that just gains us access.
Oh, it was really funny. And he just kind of just the way he landed that, it was funny. Okay, there's something else. Yeah. This is kind of tangent and off tangent a little bit, but when you were saying the greatest fear is white people becoming the minority, I mean, I feel like
not becoming the minority, becoming enslaved.
Oh, enslaved. Oh.
Yes, our deepest fear, which a lot of white people won't go deep enough to hit this, but the reality is our deepest fear is that the tables will turn and we will become enslaved.
Oh, how enslaved, be slaves, how Black people were?
Yes, that's what we're really deeply afraid of.
Oh, wow. Okay. When you said that, the thought that I had was kind of the conversation we had earlier around if we heal the patriarchy, right? Because I feel like the patriarchy is upheld because there's fear. Well, we don't want to, men don't want to lose power, because then if women take over, which in households, I really feel that women kind of are the head of the household in a way, but it's maybe men fear losing that power, the upper hand, and then suddenly becoming second class, right? What you were saying about the matriarch taking over if the patriarchy was healed, the toxic patriarchy. I don't know. I think there's a lot of reasons why power is upheld, because people don't want the fear of whatever if they lose that power.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That's a lot. Yeah. And I really appreciate your work. There are I'm friends with a lot of white people, in the US. And there are times when I will kind of dodge the topic around racism, because I'm I don't know how they feel. I don't know, some of my white friends it's very easy to talk about because you're, I feel safe around you talking about it. Other people are I don't really want to go there. I don't know if you'll I don't know. So I just dodge it because I don't know their level of, I don't know, the work that they've done, their own exposure. And it can be really triggering.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you're doing this work, and you're specifically holding space for white people, because I would imagine it's safe. It feels safe to learn from a white person.
That's exactly it. I'm a huge proponent of affinity groups. And if that is a newer term for any of your listeners, it's really where you are in a group of people who are similar to you. So you can, like a woman's affinity group, men's, and then there's also, of course, for skin color. So what you said is exactly right. Because I am white and I've just healed so much of my race-based trauma. And I've just gone through, it's trauma healing. White people feel safer asking me questions than they do a person of color, because we don't want to cause more harm. We don't want to look ignorant. We don't want to be, we don't want to be thought of as stupid. We don't want to be called racist, all of these different things. And so you just said it exactly right. It's actually incredible to me. And that there's absolutely nothing I say that's even remotely new. I mean, this has been said by people of color for 600 years. And of course, because I'm a woman and I tend to work a lot with white women, women of color say exactly what I say, have said it much longer than I have, say it a bajillion and a half times more eloquent than I will ever say it. And yet white women will hear me.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I totally respect and understand that, right? And that's why I appreciate you doing the work. And also I hear like a lot of Black women saying, and not just women, but not just Black women, but like saying like they're just tired of always having to do the work and do the teaching. Everybody looks to Black people to create the programs and let us know how we could be better. And it's like, dang it.
Yeah. That is, that's tied to white helplessness. So supremacy teaches us that we don't need to do anything on our own, and that we always need people of color to tell us what to do, what to read, what to say, how to behave. It's just tied right back into enslavement. And so that's what that issue is. And if you think about it, like if you think about it very superficially, there's an aspect of that makes sense to me, right? Like, oh, well, I want to do my race literacy work. Let me ask a person of color, what book should I read? Or what should I do? Right? Like that makes sense. But when you start to unpack it a little bit, it's assuming that all people of color know every single resource out there, right? That's ludicrous. I assure you, if a white man was like, what feminist book should I read? I'd be like, I don't know what the fuck you should read. Like, Google it. No, I don't read it. I'm a woman. Like, I experience sexism, right? I don't need to read about it. And so we assume that all people of color are just this, like, you all know everything that's out there. And like, all you want to do is just help white people and like, tell us what to do. And so it's just a huge piece around white helplessness and that supremacy pushes. And if you look at it very superficially, like I said, I think that it makes sense, like from a very superficial perspective, but when you push against it a little bit, it's like, oh, that's actually what that behavior is. And oh no, we can get on Amazon and Google, race book.
Yeah.
Not beyond our development as white people. You're not going to get it wrong, right? Just start wherever you're interested in terms of a race literacy journey, whether education, trauma, healthcare. I mean, there's not a single aspect of our country's creation and development that has not been poisoned by white supremacy.
Yeah. I love that. There's like, also, I feel like it's like it's okay to fuck up as we're learning, right? Like even for me, like I was learning more about like inclusivity around like transgender and pronouns, and this is very new. It's less new, but I'm still like, if I'm like, okay, this person's pronouns doesn't necessarily match what they might look like externally, I'm like, okay, I hope they don't fuck up. Like, okay, they go by these pronouns, and I'm like, okay, and a part of me is like, oh shit, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And like, so I understand. And also like, I have to remember, oh, I'm still learning. And I think it's okay if I just like, oh, I'm so like, like just be human about it. And just, I don't know. Like, I think it's okay to fuck up, and also be like, okay, I'm going to be better and I'm sorry, and I feel like no one's has this expectation that we're going to be perfect at it, because we're all figuring things out, and like, I'm racist, not because I'm brought up in a culture that is racist,
Yep.
I'm also sexist. Like, I've done the unconscious bias test around men and women, and I was so annoyed. I'm like, oh my God, I'm like racist. I'm like sexist against my own sex.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's humbling, isn't it? Just
and I'm just like,
the messaging that's just so permeated in our consciousnesses. You're the grace that you just talked about, and we are going to fuck up. It is absolutely inevitable in a race literacy journey. We're going to fuck up. I have multiple times. I will say I have been afforded more grace by people of color than I'm even in the universe of deserving. And I think, I don't really know why, but I think it's because when I say something and my thinking is warped by supremacy, and don't worry, I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, my consciousness is just soaked in whiteness. When I say or write something and a person of color or people of color will comment on that, it's said with such kindness and with education. Like, there's the answer, what they are sharing, there's just chock full of information for me to go and look at and be like, okay, where did I fuck up? Where did my supremacy just take over? And like, and I think I've been afforded extensive amounts of grace because I go back, I research, I do the inner work around where did I fuck up? How do I feel about that? How did my supremacy get in the way? How did my racism get in the way? And then I get back out there and I keep going and I keep speaking up. And now I'm at the point where I write regularly on it. I get interviewed a lot about this and whatnot, just because the reality is there just aren't enough white women doing this work. And so I do have a lot of doors that are open to me. But I think that's why. Because it's like, I go and lick my wounds. I don't, it doesn't feel good to like, be like, fuck, I'm just totally acting in a racist way. And apologize, learn, do better, keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that takes so much courage of like, I'm going to go and lick my wounds and like be better. And it's humbling. I remember like, I was this woman on social media. She's well respected. She's white. I follow her. We're connected. And I think she shared something, and in the comments, it was like a lot of people were saying, hey, like calling what she wrote, like she was called out. Mm-hmm. And I loved her responses, because she literally, with every call out, she was like, I'm sorry, I will do better. I'm going to research this. And it was just so humbling for me to read. And I had more respect for her. There was nothing about being defensive and like, but like she was just taking it. And that takes a lot of courage. And like, I can imagine how that would feel to the ego, and still show up and be like, okay, I'm going to do better. Like, that takes that. I just have so much respect for that, because I would feel like the initial response is to defend oneself, right? Mm-hmm. That's like such an instinctual human thing to do. Yep. So I have like so much respect, and just, it just, if anything, it makes me want to engage even more with them and support them even more. Yeah.
Yes, that's what it does. And so I really hope that, white women who are listening to this, if they, if you all are feeling any fear or trepidation or unfortunately our perfectionism and our need to be the perfect white woman really gets activated in this space, even though we get, it's an aspect of our, unfortunately, it's our hypocrisy, actually. This idea that we don't want to have to be perfect and have it all together. We white women tend to get really pissed at that. And yet we think we have to be perfect and have it all together and exactly right in race literacy work. So it's It's hypocritical behavior. But all that aside, white women, can you hear this? Like, and like, you're going to fuck up, is going to happen. And how can you do better? How can you avoid lashing out, becoming defensive, sit with whatever's being said, take some space, time and space, that's fine. And then come back when you're less triggered. And and then keep at it. And it's just, and it gets easier. It really does. Like, it's just, the more you do it, it's anything. The more we do it, the easier it gets. It just gets easier. But we got to start somewhere.
Like, there's two things. One is, I wanted to touch upon trauma. And the second one is, I did want to ask about periods and the menstrual.
Oh, yeah. That's right. Menstrual cycle.
I want to talk about that. I think that's what inspired our, like, let's have you back on. I wanted to hear more about that and like racism work.
Yeah. I'm like, let's talk about race literacy. All day. I'm like, seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did want to touch upon trauma, because trauma, there's so, like, we as people, not even looking at color, we have so much trauma that is ancestral, can be racial stuff from ancestors, right? That's passed down. I think there's evidence of that, right? And then, so there's already personal trauma not related to race. And then there's like healing racial trauma.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work. And I feel like, in a way, I so appreciate what your work. And I also do want to call out that it's a lifelong journey. Yeah. Like, it really is. And like, you can heal, like, I don't know. I just feel like I'm feeling overwhelmed just hearing, like, oh, actually, like, because people don't just have the racial trauma. There could be sexual trauma. There could be trauma from abandonment. Yeah. And then on top of it, racial trauma, that there's a lot. So I did want to call that out, because it's not overnight.
No. You're exactly right. I would imagine maybe most of us being humans, have multiple points of trauma. So we all have race-based trauma. Every single white person has it. And people of color too, but I'm saying white specifically because supremacy suppresses messaging that white people are harmed by treating people atrociously. And then we also, many of us have some other aspect of trauma. So I started my race literacy journey in 2015. And it wasn't until 2020, so 5 years later, that I actually learned that I was healing race-based trauma. I'd never come across it before until Milagros Phillips, who I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, who is just absolutely extraordinary teacher, talked about it. And as I learned from her, the way we hold trauma, race-based trauma in the body, depends on skin color, because our relationship to supremacy is different based on skin color. As white people, we hold it as supremacy because we have been taught that we are superior simply because our skin is white, or some, variant of white that allows us access to the privileges of being white. And with that, there comes, and I talked about this earlier, but I don't know how I phrased it. Anyway, with that comes, when we start doing the healing work, the anger at people of color. We blame, white people blaming people of color that we have to do this work when it's your problem, which, by the way, is a lie. It's not people. I mean, it is a problem for people of color, but racism is actually a white person problem that we've thrust onto the bodies and psyches of people of color. It's our issue to clean up. But we have anger, guilt, and shame, and a lot of tears. White women tears is a whole thing. Defensiveness, there's a ton of other things that we will get into, you get into as you go further into the race literacy journey. But so there's all that's there. Now, in my case, I grew up in an unloving home. And in 2012, I started exhibiting signs. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. And I started exhibiting signs of an emotional collapse, but I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have any context for it. And then in 2013, I had a massive emotional collapse and I had to leave DC and like quit my job and do what and whatnot. And I focused the next few years intensely on healing childhood trauma. And what I have found, I'm still doing the childhood trauma work. I mean, it's a very different, it's just very different for me now because it's been so long and I've healed so much of it. But I still do it. And I'm still doing the race-based trauma. But again, it's very different because I've healed so much of that. What I have found as a white person is that it is extraordinarily beautiful to get to heal both types of trauma. Because as a white person, for trauma that happened to us, whether abuse, seeing something horrifying like a car accident, whatever it is, at least with my childhood trauma, I can hold myself out as the victim or the survivor, depending upon where I was in my healing journey. Now I see myself as a survivor. And all of that comes with that, being on the receiving end of the trauma. Under supremacy, I'm the abuser and I'm the oppressor, and I am the one who is doing the harm. And so healing everything that goes with that. So I have been so blessed as a human being to heal this entire spectrum of human behavior, or to look at this entire spectrum of human behavior that we all possess. But like in terms of supremacy, white people, we are the oppressors. We are the abusers, whether we want to be or not. That's the reality. And so to me, it's just been such a beautiful gift to get to work in this sort of full spectrum of human emotions and human behaviors and integrate them much more solidly into my psyche and do my work from this much more integrated place.
That's really powerful. Like just being able to like kind of step away just from focus on you and just take a bird's eye view of you.
Yeah.
And being like, okay, this is where I, saw myself a victim, now a survivor. I've overcome things that was done to me. And then looking at myself as also things that I've done to others.
Yeah.
That I love that you said it's like almost this full spectrum that it just like you just become so powerful.
Yes. That's it. And one of the things that is happening in white consciousness is that most white people aren't integrated. We're operating from a disintegrated place because we're not healing the race-based trauma. And so we're not looking at the entirety of who we are. And a lot of white people, the consciousness is at a place, I think, where it's more acceptable to heal trauma healing now, and, and things that happen to us. And, if you think of women, it's certainly sexual trauma. And so those parts of the white psyche are being looked at and integrated, in a much more holistic way, but we're leaving a huge part of who we are behind or not looking at it. And so I kind of feel it like right arm's not talking to the left, and we're trying to operate as if we're this integrated, full, whole being. And actually a huge part of our consciousness is very wounded.
Oh, I love these conversations because it just, I don't know, it's just good. It's just good. Like it's deep and it's hard and it's like we need these hard conversations. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's talk about it's on the same subject.
Yes.
Periods.
Menstrual cycle.
What in the world? Tell me more of how it's connected.
Yeah. So there actually is a connection between racial literacy and menstrual cycle, and a menstrual cycle awareness, being aware of our cycle and the tracking it and our moods and whatnot. And the connection that I have come up with, and there probably are more, but what I have seen is really through this lens of well-being, wellness, self-awareness. And we can use this to our advantage in our racial literacy journey. And so what do I mean by that? With our menstrual cycle, there are 4 phases to the menstrual cycle: menstruation, follicular, luteal, I just totally, sorry, menstruation, follicular, yes, ovulation and luteal. Thank you. I was like, wait a minute, I totally forgot one. Each phase has corresponding superpowers or strengths that we are all possessed with, all of us being those who menstruate. And then there are places that are not as optimal for us to do. Like, for example, when we are menstruating, our body is designed, it's actually designed to sleep, to rest during menstruation. So there is a reason why we are exhausted. The body is doing so much work shedding the uterine lining, and all of the emotionality pieces that are happening, all these different things. And our hormone levels, especially when we start our bleed are rock bottom. And so we are meant to sleep and rest and let the body work her magic. And or work its magic. And so, but we may have gotten, messaging, we may feel guilty, we may try to push through, do all these things. But for example, when we are menstruating, actually when, towards the end of the luteal phase, which is the phase that occurs right before we menstruate, and when we're menstruating, we tend to have higher emotional sensitivity. It's just the nature of the way our hormones are operating. There's nothing wrong with us. It's biological. And because of that, we can use that when we do our racial literacy work. So if there are also times in the month when our emotions are not running as high, when we're less sensitive and we feel more courageous, and so I look at it like, if I can start to track my cycle and see when do I feel really powerful and out in the world and not really giving a shit as much about what other people think, versus those times of the month where I'm like, a stranger looking at me with like an evil eye, I want to cry and like all the things. I'm going to be really strategic about my race literacy work. Right? I'm going to post on around the times that I feel really good and really want to push the envelope and really piss white people off. And then I'm not going to post during the times when I'm more sensitive. Right. And so I look at like, and any person who menstruates can do this. For women of color, right? If you're going to have some just, work conversation, that's, often people of color are automatically recruited by white people to head up, spearhead people of color initiatives and whatnot. And it's like, that shit is exhausting from what I understand, what I've read and heard from people of color, and you're often not paid more. And it's just like this whole fucking thing. So if women of color are like, okay, I got to go do this thing that I don't want to do, right, that my company is making me do. And can I plan to do it on a time when I actually feel better in the world rather than exhausted and more, like when I'm menstruating? Or, oh God, we're going to have, a race literacy conversation at the office, and no, the white people aren't doing race literacy work, which inevitably means that people of color are going to probably honestly be great, harmed, and no forward progress is going to be made. Can that be organized again around a time when a woman of color feels better in the world? So when we do things like that, we're working more in partnership with our bodies rather than against our bodies, rather than, fighting ourselves.
So you host workshops on this, right?
I do. I do a lot of menstrual cycle tracking workshops. I do a lot with the legal profession and like aligning one's legal practice with menstrual cycle. I've never hosted one on aligning one's legal practice with racial literacy work. Aligning one's menstrual cycle with racial literacy work, but that could be a very interesting topic. But the answer is yes, I do menstrual cycle stuff.
Yeah, well, I feel like in the corporate world, menstruation is not a comfortable topic still, because it's mostly male dominated still.
White male dominated.
Yeah, thanks. It's true. What was I gonna say? There's only one company that I have seen, and maybe because it's, I am connected to this company, I have their app, that literally in their job and their benefits, they specifically spell out you get menstrual leave.
I love it.
Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, I want to work for you all.
Yeah.
And I remember when I actually, for, this job that that I'm at, when I was talking to the recruiter, I specifically asked, can I get menstrual leave? And I mean, it was like the company is like, you have flexible, like unlimited paid time off. So I could have used it. Like, I didn't need to declare I have my period, I'm going to take time off, but it's still uncomfortable to say because it's not like it's not explicitly spelled out. You get menstrually.
Right.
So I'll just be like, I'm not feeling well today. I need to take a break, you know?
Yeah.
But, which it's encouraged, please rest if you need it. But it's still an uncomfortable topic because it's like, well, I'm not sick. I'm just tired and I need sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where I'm sharing this because I hope it's like when you're in the law firms that are mostly male run, that's my guess. It's like we're gonna have
white male run. White male run.
White male run.
We are playing right into a man, most likely a white man's weakest parts when we aren't honest with what's going on. And we are assuming that man cannot handle our truth, which might not be true at all. So when we choose to share, if it feels right and it feels safe, there's a lot of dynamics there. But if we choose to share, I'm menstruating today, I don't feel good, I'm really, whatever, I'm taking the day off. They're going to have whatever response they're going to have. But we have taken the initiative to give them an opportunity to step up and honestly grow up. And maybe they can actually hold it. I mean, hopefully, men, but again, mostly white men have at least one person in their life they care about who menstruates. Right. And so I think that we actually do them a disservice and we play into the weakest parts of them, or we assume that they can't handle the truth when that might not be true at all. It might be, but it might not. And I will say a few weeks ago, I was supposed to go on a walk with a male friend of mine, and I started my period and I sat with it. I was like, do I tell him? Do I lie? And I was like, no, for exactly that reason. I was like, I'm going to just text him and say, I need to reschedule. I started menstruating and I'm tired. I need to sleep. And he responded. He's like, like the next day, he's like, I'm sorry you're not feeling well. Please rest. We'll get, like he responded with such grace and kindness. And had I lied to him, I would not have been able to experience that part of him. And I would not have been in integrity with myself.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's like, this is why, it's interesting because if it's one-on-one, I think I would have not as much of a problem, but I think when I'm announcing it in like a group Slack channel of, hey, I'm not doing well.
Yeah.
That's when I'm like, I don't know, like, and no one's really like sharing their exact reason of why they're not feeling well.
Yeah.
But what was I gonna say? So I love that. I love the just being like, hey, and it's true actually, in all of my experiences of even in like, well, definitely romantic relationships, that's not something you should hide from. But it's like, it's like, I'm sorry you're feeling like shit. Is there anything I could do? Like, usually guys will step up. But it's interesting because the reason I think what started like, hey, you should come on my podcast was when you wrote a while back last year, you wrote about period and you said white patriarchy or something like that. Like, I'm going to share this. And that really inspired me to share a similar post. Cause I was thinking like, when I have my period, like I need the first day off. Like I'm just tired.
Yes.
And I was just thinking like at that time, because it wasn't back in corporate, I was like, I'm so glad I don't have a corporate job right now because I'm feeling like shit and I'm committed to taking the first 2 days off. And I don't know if I can do that in corporate world.
Right.
And that's what created the whole patriarchy post. And I wrote white I associate patriarchy with whiteness, even though I think we've had this conversation during the first interview. But what was my whole point in saying this?
It's how your post was received versus my post. I remember.
Oh yeah, it wasn't well received at all. Like, no, well, when I say that, I mean, I got 2 pushbacks that I ended up blocking, and one unfriended me. Okay, bye.
Bye.
But like, what was I saying? Just around like, I think this is more related. It's not, I don't think it's related to race, maybe. I don't think it's related to race. I think it's around the patriarchy, around periods. Because why do women feel like they need to hide it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't think it's so much race. It's we are coddling men, which is its own problem.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what the history is for women of color sharing menstruation with men of color. I don't know what that is. When I look at white women, we coddle white men. And, there's if you, when you look back at the history of whiteness, supremacy, this idea that like, the ton in England, like the richest people in England that all had titles that whomever king gave them, whatever, all that bullshit. And like, white women had to behave a certain way. And like, they hid all this stuff, like this ludicrous stuff. But we held that as the epitome of like class. White people held that like that is the standard of class and like the way to be in the world. And in that, white men were just ungodly coddled, right? Like, they couldn't, like women didn't share anything and women upheld it. So like we being white women had a huge fucking piece in this. And so from that perspective, yes, I think it's patriarchy, but I don't know if women of color have behaved the same way towards men of color, which is why I don't want to come right out and be like, yes, that is true patriarchy, because it might not be. And it might have been that women of color have like maybe Black African American women before they were enslaved and brought here or to Latin America. Maybe that was a very open thing. And men of color revered women of color when they were bleeding, and as the mystics and our connection to our greater consciousness, to our inner being, and to the divine is heightened. It's actually heightened during that period. It's actually true. And that could have been honored then. I just don't know. And then it was supremacy that put the kibosh on women talking about this. So that's why I'm like reluctant to be like, yes, that's true patriarchy, because I don't know the whole
history or whatever.
Exactly.
Well, yeah. And like for me, because I was raised in I was raised in a Western culture.
Yeah.
It's like I'm drinking the same water, I'm breathing in the same water that we're most of us are in North America, Canada, and US. I can't speak for Mexico. But I do, like, now as an adult, right? Like, it's so funny. As a teenager, I think as teens, like, we're already kind of like, oh, maybe I don't want anyone to know, I'm going to hide the pad or whatever, or the tampon. Yeah. And like, I just remember even like, I didn't want my dad to know. My dad and I never talked about our periods, and then my mom made it not a big deal at all. So I'm just like, okay. And like, it's so funny. This is like kind of off topic, but not really. But like Judy Blume, like her documentary is on Prime right now. And she talked about the book Margaret, or Their Goddess Be Margaret, which I've read when I was like, 9 or 10. Great book. One of like, it was such a coming of age book, right? But like now as an adult, I have to like consciously push through any type of like, oh, okay, my period. So I'll tell my dad, like especially when I was living with family, when I was back home visiting, I'm just like, I feel like shit today. I cannot go with you guys. I have a period. And my dad's like, oh, so he would make me like ginger tea. He's like, do you want ginger tea? I'm like, yes. And I'm like, holy shit, like this whole time?
Right.
I couldn't, like, it was so cool. And I'm like, well, mom usually makes it with goji berries. He's like, okay. And he's looking for the goji berries.
Oh.
Yeah. And then like when I was in Bali, like I had cramps and I lived really like next door to this little restaurant and I met the owner. He's super cool guy. And I'm like, oh, I can't. I have my period today and I'm having cramps, like literally. And he's like, oh, do you want me to make you ginger tea? I was like, I would love that.
Oh.
Yeah. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, how much? He's like, no charge. Like so sweet. And I really like why I just feel like yeah, I don't know. These are all Asian guys. I'm just thinking back to, I don't know, just like how can we lift men up to support us as women,
Right.
when we, and I just love what you said around like I don't know all the history as well, but just like women were seen like closer to God, closer to the divine when we had our periods, like amazing. And I love that. It's like take back our power, which we somehow threw away because we were taught to be ashamed of our bodies. I feel like that message it's interesting. I don't feel like I really got a rite of passage as like stepping into womanhood. Although I think I would have been really embarrassed if I did have that. I'm like, what are you doing? This is weird, and this is like a whole different topic, I feel like. And yeah, but something that I did want to call out was like when I was saying like men, you kept saying white men, which and the company that I work at currently, it was founded by a white woman. Anyways, I want to say that. So it wasn't a white man.
Thank you for that. And I will piggyback on yours and I will say, I haven't practiced law in years, but when I did, white women partners were so horrible to me, like light years beyond in cruelty compared to male partners. And I have a lot. I think the reason was because at that time, those women were really first generation women partners in law firms. And so God only knows the hell they had to go through to reach that level of prestige and positionality within a law firm. And so I think probably unconsciously, they were like, oh, I had to kill myself to get here. So I'm going to do the same to you. And I've always looked at that and I was like, that was really, they had an opportunity to set a different tone for female associates coming through and they didn't take it, at least the ones I worked with. And I was always really struck by that. And I was like, what if I was to be a partner in a law firm now, which is not likely to happen, but if it was to happen, I want to lead in a different way.
I will say that's probably a reflection of patriarchy.
Yeah.
Like you had to, like women had to be the man, be like the man. And in order to climb the ladder and be seen as equals, but yeah, interesting. I'm thinking about the continued call about because I feel like it's being harsh. I'll be honest. Like when you kept saying white men, and I was like, is that true? I'm like, I guess so. Like I've worked all the big companies I've worked at have all except for this one I'm at a startup founded by a woman who I have respect for her and like the work that she's done and all that. So I don't have any I don't really have direct, like, I don't have direct conversations with her per se. And same with all the other companies I worked for previously in terms of the, the founders and all that, but they're all men.
I know. Yes, I will say it does probably come across as me white male bashing. And
no, it's just you're calling out because this is race literacy work.
And, I hear you on I am very specific that it's white patriarchy because men of color don't have the same benefits as white men. And as you just explained, and I suspect many of your listeners, when they look at organizations, the vast majority of men at the top are white. And so that's why, to me, it's not accurate to lump men of color into toxic patriarchy, because men of color aren't the ones making the rules. They're not, for the most part, they aren't the decision makers. Like, the way our society has unfolded is it has been white men and then white women right underneath white men under supremacy. And again, white women receive far more benefits under supremacy than what we lose under patriarchy. Which is, again, why I always come back, I'm like, with white women, we can't focus on patriarchy. We got to come back to supremacy and what our role has been in terms of our continued loyalty to white men, to supremacy. We never stand with women of color. We never stand with people of color. In fact, we make their lives often infinitely harder. We have in the past, and we continue to do so. And that's why, to me, that's why I take the positionality that I do.
And thank you for that, like, for doing that. I'm just like, as you're talking, I'm like thinking, like, I think if I'll be honest, like, as a person who is not white, right? If I delineate that so much, I would start judging. I'd be like, white, you're white, and therefore you're like, I would box that in.
Yeah.
It's interesting for me as someone who is of color to be like, well, how do I want to I don't know if that is healthy for me to categorize.
Yeah.
Because then I feel like somehow I am separating myself from okay, this person is a white person. I don't know. I just feel like maybe it would be a little too much for my nervous system versus, I don't know if that's necessarily my work, to be honest.
Sure.
I
love that. I love that you're so aware of that in your own system for processing. And I absolutely could be wrong. I'm basing what I say on lots of reading and learning, and your experiences have been different. Your learnings have been different. And the reality is, I'm white. I can get away. I mean, that's it. That's truly what a part of it is. I can get away with saying toxic white patriarchy in a way that you cannot as a woman of color.
We've talked for like how long? I think like this is the longest I've gone.
I know. I mean, you may have to split it up into like 2 or 3 parts.
Y'all. How can people learn more about you and all the things?
Yeah, so you can go to my website. It's alyssajohnson.love, LOVE. And there you will find just all sorts of things about my work and whatnot, both related to lawyer well-being and then related to race literacy, which is not just for lawyers, lawyer well-being, obviously, for lawyers. And then the race literacy book club, you can sign up for it. And there's just a whole host of stuff.
Amazing. Check the show notes. It'll all be there. And then connect with Alyssa on her website. Yes. Thank you so much. I so enjoyed our conversation.
To help you feel more supported and nourished in your body and nervous system, you're invited to download the free I Am Supported meditation in the show notes. May you feel grounded in who you are as you become the fullest expression of yourself. Thank you for listening to the Sacred Emergence podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and thank you in advance for sharing with those who can benefit. Until next time.